They don't want to hear it. And that's what the culture war is about. That's that degree of open sexuality is never going to be a majority in the civilized world. And if it does, then we're not the civilized world.
Welcome back to Body Politics, everybody. This is our third episode, and we are here today with Clinton Ignatov, who is one of these lurker legends in the IDW. He's been around for basically as long as I have, shows up from time again. This isn't the first conversation we'd have. I hope it won't be the last. But Clinton, what's up, man?
Oh, doing all right. Keeping my head down, trying to write. Been writing for Default Friends, fantastic Substack. I really got to push that because she's the internet culture historian extraordinaire and Twitter sensations. I'm really grateful to be able to write columns for her on her platform. And yeah, just exploring internet culture, automation, all that stuff.
Yeah, amazing, man. And that's partly, well, that basically is why we're interested to bring you on today, precisely because of the stuff you've been writing about for that site. But as we were just saying beforehand, it might be an interesting way to open this up. You've been listening to the last couple of episodes that we've done. You just told us that you're halfway or 2/3 of the way through Phil Illy's book. So a way to get this going is maybe to ask you, what are the threads that have most interested you in the last body politics conversations, and can you relate them to the things that you've been exploring in these pieces?
I think so. These pieces you're talking about is a series I called The Last Batch, and the premise was basically how is AI an automation of things that we were doing before manually? Because that's what automation is. It replaces people's jobs, right? It's a machine, and we've been doing that for 500 years. And so I wanted to try to find some new historical context for the conversation about AI, especially image generation. And it just all things pointed towards porn in my head, and that's not my usual subject of writing. But I was like, all right, time to bite the bullet and write about internet pornography, especially like hentai and shit, because as far as I figured out, like that's where things are going automation wise. Phil Illy's book is great because it's a rather bold exposition of autogynophilia, which is a term I've heard for a few years, and you may have already talked about it, but just this idea that being trans can have an ideology besides being born that way, but also a state of romantic or sexual interest with yourself as your own love object, right? Autoerotic target inversion. It's funny because I've been following the internet drama around this stuff. And when I say internet drama, actual social drama among activism and trans people for how contentious it is to be told a conflicting origin story for your own identity when you believe that you were born a woman or born a man or born something else. For sexologists to come along and fight you on that is a horrible, an egoic injury at the least, right? So that's why I see these conversations flaring up. But there's one thing about the premise that I find questionable. And this isn't Phil's premise I'm questioning. This is all like sexology as a whole, like the entire idea of focusing on identity formation around sexual attraction or sexual identity. And I guess I can get at it with this. He makes a distinction early on, or sexology makes a distinction between allosexuality and autosexuality. So allosexuality is, as I'm learning, is the common term for just being sexually attracted to other people. Most people are allosexual, so much so that we don't bother saying allo. We just say, like, well, what's your sexuality? Yeah. And then autosexuality is the inversion of that on yourself. I like to study media through the lens of media ecology, and it's about considering how our environments shape everything about our humanity, our physical environments. And one notable thing about our physical environments is with innovations in, let's say, glass manufacturing in the past 200 years, mirrors have become ubiquitous. Cheap, mass-produced mirrors are a product of manufacturing in the mid-1800s. The fact that everyone has got a mirror in their house has only been true for less than 200 years. And I don't agree, like, structurally with the idea of allosexuality being different from autosexuality, because what a mirror does is put your body outside of yourself. And so you're still allosexual when you're sexually attracted to an image of yourself outside of yourself. It's an image of yourself that's there. It's not here. You can't see yourself. You can look down. And so it may sound pedantic, but I think that's an example of how our environment is a key factor outside of socialization, or the terms or the language we use or the paradigms or the frameworks or how we were nurtured by our parents or whether our teachers responded to us or not. Like most environmental concerns are about socialization. But what about physical, material, actual, tangible environments? So that's where I think my piece gets in with the premise of Phil's book.
Interesting, because you do talk about or critique this concept of identity formation through sexuality. And you mentioned that people seem to be on this quest to find themselves through traversing these landscapes of sexual imageries and combinations of symbols. And I think that there's a deeper critique there just in the concept of sexual identity to begin with, right? This quest for understanding oneself through the process of learning your kinks and all of your like masturbatory fantasies.
Yeah, I think, see, I can relate to it more so through my long phase of being a stoner who would like download discographies of bands and then listen to them at work and then listen to them at home and then create the perfect playlist and then play them at work. I worked full time in a retail setting in an airport that allowed me to play my own music, and I would use all these international passengers as my laboratory for what they liked or what drove them out of the store. And I'm playing obscure stuff. I like to put on Brian Eno's music for airports sometimes.
Airports,
funny,
yeah,
right? But
yeah.
no licenses being paid. This is total piracy, but whatever. But this exploration of music is all about finding this flow state, this dance, this groove. And it was how I expressed myself more so than, say, the clothes I wore or the conversations I had with people. I always had this thought that I was saturating the room with some sort of aesthetic feel with and this is, I know lots of DJs who get deep into conversations about how in depth they are with reading the room at a dance and knowing what to do and telling when people aren't vibing and creating. They're externalizing their sense or their aesthetic into the shaping of this environment. Cinematography is about that. We do this with all sorts of expressive media. Now, my goal with music in that sense is to engender a flow state or dance. And I just think that sexual arousal and masturbation and sex are just like the peak flow state. And so, in a more general sense, we're always trying to get into this constant euphoric, never-ending now and lose ourselves. That's what we do as humans. And so the fact that most of us, when we're seeking that, go straight for the dankest source of flow we can get, which is getting off, especially socially with other people, seems natural and obvious to me. But just this relation of our bodies to time and space seems more fundamental than specifically sex alone.
I love that. Porn, the dankest source of flow.
Only if the pages aren't stuck together.
Amen, man. Magazines. Love it. It's interesting, and I'm curious to get into the theories that you've been exploring in your writings on porn. I'm just coming out of the European or the Manzine conference, it's a big European men's conference, and obviously porn is one of the big topics in the men's community, and it's interesting to see the dialogue there getting a bit more sophisticated than what I think it has been today. Up to date, I've seen that basically it falls into either a kind of explicit moralism of this is bad because it's just bad for your soul or it's bad for you or whatever, or a kind of gentle moralism of it's best if you don't do it. It's best if you don't do it for whatever reasons. But actually what was brought this weekend, one of the things that was interesting, we were talking a lot about shame, and there's a guy, Dr. Robert Glover, who is one of the big American men's work guys. And he was talking that the way he works with a lot of guys who come to him and they say, I've got an issue with porn, is that they sit down together and watch the videos together. And he says, tell me what you're into. Tell me how you like to touch yourself, how you like to pleasure yourself while you're watching this. And he said, very often with these guys, it completely cuts through the neurosis. And what they realize is that their problem was not actually with the medium itself. It was with the emotional relationship they had with themselves and how they're using the medium. And the moment it's been shared with somebody else and the shame is gone, the whole neurosis melts away. Then Alexander Bod, someone should probably do a bingo game. It's like, when is Owen, how long is it going to take Owen to say Alexander Bod in an episode? But
Yeah.
there we go. He was making a metaphysical distinction, but a distinction between what he calls light porn and dark porn. So light porn being the stuff that's actually created exhibitionistically and sometimes with a political purpose to it, versus the dark stuff, which is the stuff that's probably potentially trafficked, or there's some kind of seedy abuse thing going on behind the scenes, and actually coming at us pro the former and against the latter, and then also being pro communal consumption, and which led me to thinking it's funny that actually before we had the internet and we had the screens, we had the theater, the porno theater, where you'd go and watch it in a group, exactly like a movie theater. And that it's fascinating to think in terms of a tribal experience of this medium rather than a totally atomized one. So with that, just some thoughts. Clinton, where are you at the moment? Where's your writing going?
Yeah, no, that's funny that talking about the communal aspect. I remember first time going to a gay bar for a Mr. Leather competition in like 2013, and upstairs there's screens with porn everywhere, and I was like, holy crap, it's a rather shocking thing. And now it's okay, yeah, of course you go to someone's house, but that initial young naive sort of shock of, whoa, other people will acknowledge in public they watch porn at all, amazing. It definitely changed a lot of her, recalibrated a lot of things. It's funny, we're just one more question. I remember nofap as a movement was such a huge thing, right? Like this attempt to find like cognitive science reasons or scientific reasons behind porn. Is that even still a thing anymore? Does anyone?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's lurking in the background. I certainly don't see people, certainly in the movements that I'm in, talking explicitly about it, but I think it's done its work.
Yeah.
It's really embedded. It's like people who know nothing about cognitive science or psychology will say things like, science has proven that it's bad for your brain.
Yeah.
So it's become part of the mass discourse, right? This science.
Yeah. It's funny because part of McLuhan's theories about silent reading and what the printing press did was that you find solitude and you read a book by yourself, and this sort of creates a private individualism, right? You're reading words silently in your own head, structuring a self in a socialization, but there's no embodiment. It's just silent words, right? So when you talk about private, shameful viewing of pornography, that's like a full attempt at sensory embodiment. You're trying to imagine the sensations and all stuff, but again, you're by yourself, right? You're lacking that awareness of how identity is fostered by being aware of how you exist in the gaze of others, like gaze, Gaze, just to, right? But yeah, that's one thing that I really focused on. I had a bit of a psychosis, I don't know, 7 years ago. And one thing that I made a deliberate effort to think of was that you have to become someone using other people as your mirror, as your reflection of yourself, more so than trying directly to model yourself and template yourself on abstract psychometrics or categories or the voices that most appeal to you in a group you found on the internet, on a Discord somewhere or a subreddit. There's a massive rush. Raven, you alluded to my critique of the discovery of self as a journey, right? It's like, oh, a journey is often, oh, I've got to find my people or return home. And this is something that, in a very different way, James Lindsay has been trying to get at when he talks about Gnosticism as relevant to explorations of transgender identity or transsexual identity, because he gets it from this fellow called Vogelin, who I read a lot of like a few years ago. And Vogelin thought that Gnostics were exemplary of people who are alienated from their world and who are trying to get home again. And that can be through like home is another ethereal plane, or find their community, or find the place they finally belong, because wherever they're at in their world, in their life, there's this constant nagging of, I'm not meant for this place isn't meant for me, this is wrong. And where Vogelin took this was a political dimension. He said that Marxism and the hopes of revolutionary politics was to create the home to which people felt they needed to return and obliterate this fallen facade or whatever. It's all very religious, but for me, the takeaway is that it's about a journey of finding yourself somewhere, finding yourself out there in the world, and then becoming that self, or finding the place you belong where others are like you. And it's all relatable and it's all true. And we should all hope to have a family and grow old with people who understand us and know us for who we really are. But when it becomes transformative, when it becomes a metamorphosis, right? It's like you're searching the world, but you're changing yourself. There's a lot of slippage there in so many different directions. And the world is full of rabbit holes that are greased to bring you into many different folds. And right now, lots of the language coming from activism is very naive in the sense of ignoring how precarious identity is and how certain people can be straight away, and the projections of others who are saying, oh, you're just like me, let me show you what it was like. You remind me so much of myself when I was your age. And these are the sort of things that conservatives are fretting about, as conservatives always worry about everything with their amygdalas the way they are. But I don't think that they're not, if they're blowing things out of proportion, that's a matter of debate. But I don't think that what they're noticing isn't very salient and important to focus on.
Yeah, honestly, couldn't have said it better myself. I think extremely naive narratives, especially amongst young people, about the actual predatory nature of the ecology that we happen to be in. And I think what you're pointing out is that this isn't just some layer of social construction where it's just the beliefs that we hold that are manipulating us, like the patriarchy. It's the having the mirror in the house. It's the 2-year-old who just can't stop looking at themselves in the mirror and kind of somehow projects their own sexual attraction to this image. It's the fact that now the mirror is augmented and talking to us and reorienting the way that we're sitting inside of our own existence and our bodies and how we reflect upon ourselves and how others see us. And then of course, also we have the dissociation of the image of the self, but the knowledge of the self as an inner place being projected out onto a fandom, a Discord, a Reddit. Or I think what you're talking about in your pieces is these massive places where all this porn collects, all this hentai collects, and all these tags that people have created. And in order to help foster these flow states, you can move through this whole network of images without breaking your arousal. And I'm sure that there's little communities that pop up around this and people who form identities around the sense of belonging, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Stationery stores used to be the normal place you go to buy paper and ink and paint, and it was expensive. But now they're like a novelty of like bougie areas and high class. Ooh, I buy paper with watermarks on it for my stuff. Like paper's ubiquitous and cheap, and pens and crayons are everywhere. Graphic art is normal, and lots of furries are graphic artists at a young age. And learning how to draw is encouraged by everyone, because be creative, have a talent, be an artist. We all love it when our kids draw and improve and get better at paintings. But literally, it's a foray of exploration and creation and world creation of a sense, which again we've only been doing for a few decades. J.R. Tolkien created Middle Earth and fictional languages because he was a polymath genius, and no one else out there was creating massive imaginary universes. But now every 14-year-old who binged a bunch of fantasy novels wants to go create their giant fictional universe, and they can, and they will, and they do, and that's encouraged, right? So our imaginations are just billowing into this frictionless, limitless space of the what could be and the potential and the fantastical, because of the ubiquity of creative media, and digital art amplifies that again on top of this. And Dungeons and Dragons grew out of the same sort of world building and game playing that the military was innovating only a few decades prior, with like modeling, say, like the Cold War, right? Like all these activities, they're so young, and we don't talk about directly about how our technology and our ability to do math simply with computers and to draw, right, is the groundwork for which all this play takes place. It's the physical, actual externalization of ourselves into these media. And that's so much more powerful to me than socialization.
Oh yeah, certainly. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, and of course it's all and then it's plugged directly into the libido when we're looking at something like porn. There's no real mediation. You're just exploring what pathways inside of you are masturbatory, right? In terms of visual imagery for a lot of men, but also then for women, they love reading erotic, smutty fanfic and getting into these other kinds of transformative spaces. And so men and women are consuming porn in massive amounts if you include also the narrative fiction that's out there for women. And this it's so fascinating to just be seeing the imprint of the human sexual mind on the population level being exposed through imagery, animation, of course, animation, because then you're not restricted to the limitations of the human body.
Yeah.
And then also just through narrative, of course, you can create a werewolf creature that comes and takes you as the princess or whatever it is.
Yeah, and the aesthetic of vampire chic, especially in the 90s with all that stuff, just the allure of all that, the maturity of an immortal, oh my god. All these ridiculous,
Oh my gosh, actually one of the things that you said in your piece that I just loved, the imagery that it gave me was this: the internet is the fan world, right? You have the daytime fan world and then you have the nighttime fan world. Where you're like, ooh, this is where the Harry Potter like figures start fucking each other. But in the daytime, you're like solving puzzles and saving the world, and in the nighttime, it's dirty.
It is. This is something Bard talks about a lot, about how shamanic and queer identities will always exist on the margins, and sexuality is always intimate and it's always vulnerable. And hiding your vulnerabilities is important when you live in a city surrounded by strangers. We get up all day and we walk down the street. We get up every day. We walk down the street. And we're friendly to total strangers. We have little polite conversations with absolute, and that's a very strange thing for an animal to do, to be okay, surrounded by strangers and mere acquaintances all the time. And like city life is aberrant to what our instincts tell us. It takes so much socialization into safe, stereotyped, well-known forms that our comfort of being in the same room with other people and not feeling in danger is something that's heavily socialized. But also now these media influences. So sexuality has always been outside of that. That's the daytime you, the public you, the one that you'll own. The fact that our sex lives are occulted, I was going to say. Most people keep it veiled. Lots of people are loud and proud. And I know, of course, it's Pride Month and sexuality abounds, and prudes are freaking out about it.
Always, yeah.
It's I'm sorry, just
what I would say, it seems like though, like the thing about being in this fantastical space of the living screen of the animated world, right? It's very difficult to contain the nightlife of the internet purely in that space. And especially now that the way that I think about what we're going into with the kind of deep fake semantic apocalypse is this environment that we're interacting with today that still has the semblance of the real in it, like this idea that you could possibly trust something that's on it, that it isn't just pure fantasy space, will no longer live with that illusion. It will be seen for what it is, which is a pure fantasy space, a pure imaginary space. Each pixel can be manipulated to create whatever the creator wants. And in that world, there's just no boundary necessarily between the nighttime and the daytime. And I think this is another thing that the conservatives or the prudes, the parents of the world are like, wait a second, like, how do I put my kid into this environment? Because there's no real solid boundary for the nighttime and the daytime.
Yeah, my coping mechanism there with that realization was a materialism of looking at the actual physical environment. So I've always been a computer nerd. And the computer's most advanced thing that we've created as a thing that we then all own 30 of and use every single day incessantly and carry around with us everywhere. And that's what the real world is to me. It's the world where we created all these highly complex things that no one knows how to talk about properly, because no one understands them except for a few nerds in California who are shaping our world with impunity and changing the apps you use and determining how it is and how much they can listen in on your conversations and how much they can control your schedule or what to show you and hide you. And so taking power over your own computer is a big political aim for me. I don't have to go into that too deeply, but that's the real world for me, is this world where politically. Advertisers have used artwork to create consumer classes, and governments have used polling data, or I should say political parties use polling data to gain elections, and journalists shape public opinion, and the whole history of PR and propaganda, the history of consumer research. That's right. It's let's just look at the man behind the curtain and stop getting so distracted with a giant green head calling himself the Wizard of Oz. And yeah, the language for that is not something that you learn in school. It's not something that is popular. It's not something that's fun to learn. It's sobering and turns you cynical and makes you think everyone else is a dumb sheeple, and you're gonna start seeing it all as conspiratorial, and it's a horrible, dreadful rabbit hole to go into cognitively and think, I can't wake up from this because I'm telling myself that this is what reality is actually made of. It's very much a lowest of lows, if you want to talk in a narratology sense, or a descent into like, how fucked are we? And then you pull back, you're like, oh my God. And unfortunately, we're watching people take that, let's go back to it, take that journey into, wait, how bad are things really? And yeah, it's hard not to get, as they would say, black-pilled or cynical or nihilistic about it. But then you realize, like, the sun is shining here in Canada. Is it still raining over there?
Yeah, it's raining a little bit.
It's raining a little.
But I'm in Amsterdam, which is just like one of the most pleasant, lovely, idyllic cities I've ever been in. Everyone's riding around their bicycles. I can hardly believe it.
Yeah.
Protestant in me. What? Where's the suffering?
Yeah, exactly.
That's so you. Make me suffer.
That's it. I'm sitting on my computer screen telling myself a story of despair and all this thing, and then I go outside and I'm like, this is a beautiful day. This is awesome, and I'm gonna go hang out with my friend, and I'm gonna go on a date. I'm gonna go do that, and so the fact that I'm just grappling with that alone and recognizing that what you can do is better yourself and
I
better
like what you brought earlier, right, about the word occult with regard to sex. And it, you know, it made me think when you were just talking there, there's this colossal paradox in which sex is the expression of the most radical, singular absurdity of our being. It's like Cadell Last the other day was just making the point that anybody who thinks that truth is rational, just look at the sex drive. You're not going to get away from it. And it's not a rational thing. It's just a drive that thrusts itself through you. And so then with the internet, with porn, there's this endless medium to explore and express and discover the singularity of your own fantasies. And yet at the same time, it's paradoxically, exactly like you said, completely shaped and controlled via basically the design mechanisms of a tiny minority who are building Pornhub and building OnlyFans and whatever else it is. And then there's, alongside this, I almost think of it, I call it like the dark alleys of the internet, the kind of guerrilla revolutionaries who steal the stuff off the main sites and then post it around forums. And then Raven and I had a really good conversation about this recently, where she basically called me out on hanging out in these places a little bit. These places, this is theft. Like, this is theft of imagery that's been produced by people, that's been intended not to be commercially shared, but it's just been ripped off. And it's, again, that gets into, it's such a McLuhanite paradox that the medium tends toward infinite reproducibility of image. So if you're posting a picture of your tits or your dick or whatever on the internet, that's inherent in the very medium you're using. Yeah, and yet at the same time, these dark alleys, these communities, if they were doing what they were doing in physical space, it would be the equivalent of marching into a brothel, fucking someone, and then leaving without paying.
Absolutely. The rules are different. The rules are so different. And I got it into, growing up on the internet when Napster was exploding and all the geeks are fighting about whether or not, I guess, protections on physical media are just obsolete now, and bands are going to have to get used to never making a cent on their money ever again. And then now we have to socially construct through laws and reasons and policies, reasons to continue financing the arts, despite the fact that the money making isn't tied to a physical commodity anymore. So now we have intellectual property, and you can make a case for having artists get paid for their work I think, without also allowing some of the worst practices which intellectual property law has allowed to be done as sheer profiteering and financial domination and over other countries through policies and charter making. There's all sorts of politics behind intellectual property law, I guess, is my point. But the fact that, for me, it comes down to how physical objects have object permanence, and Jean Piaget talks about how kids have to learn how physical reality works by pouring water between things and guessing the weight of stuff before they pick it up. And the objects on our computer screen don't have those properties. And our bodies, when we grow up in relation to objects that don't behave like physical objects, our sense of what objects and what object permanence is and does, I can't think isn't horribly impacted at a deep physiological level of embodiment and relation to environment.
What does that mean? Because I don't really know what the object permanence theory is.
Object permanence theory is playing peekaboo with your kid. And your kid freaks out every time your face is covered. And then when you come back, it's, oh my God, he's still there. And eventually your kid learns that just because you can't see a thing doesn't mean that the thing's gone away. Like, physical objects are permanent. They exist in physical space. And we live in a world of static objects. That's a Western paradigm that got under intellectual assault 100 years ago with Henry Bergson, who is a predecessor of Gilles Deleuze. So reality becomes all weird and post-real in the way that Raven was describing, when we live in a world where lots of the things that we watch aren't really physical things, or lots of things that we like. They exist on the other side of this piece of glass, these screens. People have been falling in love with movie stars who are automations of gesture and voice and emotion. Of course you can fall in love with a movie star or admire a movie, right? But John Wayne can't actually shoot you. You're not scared of him, at least not when you grow up, right? We learn different rules for spaces that only exist in our imagination in the content of media. And kids who poke at a touchscreen at an iPad when they're 4, I attended a conference that had a great talk about a guy who was studying how the human hand learns its dexterity. The human hand is the most complicated, dexterous part of our hands. And so he's talking about how you have to have kids helping you in the kitchen cutting vegetables at a young age. I did lots of fine model work, like painting and gluing and stuff, right? Using our hands, because you learn how to hold things gently or tightly. You learn gestures. And to be honest with you, kids pawing, and I think that's the right word, pawing at a piece of glass for most of their developmental age at an early age is going to have to do horrible things to their sense of physical embodiment by neglect and absence of manipulation of the world in a way where their muscles learn to interact in the physical world. The same thing goes for lack of rough and tumble play at recess. You can't play tag and tackle someone or play Red Rover. You can't learn how physical bodies work in wrestling. And I'm sure that experience as a young kid in wrestling is a precursor to healthy sex activity later, just because you learn how bodies work, right? All these things. And the more we have deep sensual experiences with things that aren't physical objects that we can handle and touch, I think there's going to be a gap there.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be real interesting to watch these kids grow up. And I guess we're already seeing it with Gen Z, but the kids being born now are even more immersed in the screen worlds than Gen Z was. I think about sex in this way because there seems to be some divide in people where there's just some people who can't help it. They just have to fuck. They just have to. So even if they've been on screens their whole life, even if they've been put through an education system that tries to suppress their libido, the minute they're out of there, it's just all the pressure release just goes out the window and suddenly they're in the world. Just, I have to do this. I have to do this now. And it's interesting, that instinct, because it does seem like there's other people where sex is, it is dirty and it mixes and I don't want to do it. It's weird. It's intimate. It's gooey, liquidy stuff with strangers. I don't want to do that. And how that's going to create very different life trajectories for people today.
For me, there's such a vulnerability because you're putting yourself in the hands of someone else's appraisal of you in such a way that you can't delude yourself out of their reaction. And it's such an intimate part of yourself. And the proof is in the pudding, especially since dudes have a lot harder time faking sexual arousal than women do, especially. So it's such a test in that regard. And yeah, if it's, I think that lots of people are shy, and pornography is their outlet for so long that it becomes part of how they experience their sex life, and that's where these communities for negotiating hookups premised on fetishes specifically offer a safe, I guess, okay, in general, the internet allows communities of like-minded people to get together. So if there's something that only 1 in 1,000 people would get off to, that means there's 1,000 people who get off to that in your city of 1 million people.
Yeah.
You get the internet.
Yeah.
And now you can be sure to find, you got this whole sea of people who will affirm what you got going on, right? It's just, and that is the allyship, the umbrella. I think it's premised, right? It's like political activism. The idea that schools are teaching kids to be gay or queer is ridiculous, because it is even the idea that universities are behind postmodernism because it's getting taught in universities and indoctrinated. And now these ideas, this history of ideas, ideology for any of these things is ridiculous. It's like books somehow, like books haven't been parasitizing our brain since the cinema was invented, since the cinema camera. It's movies that get us now, and now it's video games and art and drawing and doodles and porn, right? We're possessed by a whole multimedia imagery, and we're looking for our mirror reflection, ourself, our other, in all of these things.
Yeah, I love that point about it being a mirror, because this is one of the things that always amuses me when I hear people in the anti-porn camp talking about how porn fills your head with all of these things and perverts you and makes you look at all these twisted things that you're not interested in, but it like makes you more and more extreme. And I think, no, that's you, baby. That's you. Those are the deep parts of your psyche. Like, sure, maybe, I think Raven, you once used this language once. These are the deep elder gods that most people never come anywhere near. But no, you get off on that shit. You get off on whatever that sordid, depraved thing, because it's interacting with some primal fantasy that you have.
There's something true there. Like, I used to hate peanut butter, and every few years I'm like, I should try it again. Ooh, no, it's still gross. But if there's some porn that's horrible to you, and yet for some reason, unless you're purposely testing yourself every 6 months, why are you going back? What's your focus?
Yeah, I'm definitely partial to this idea that what we're seeing is an exposure of an evolved, archaic, primal sexuality. That when people talk about sexuality being inborn, oh, I'm gay and this is something I didn't choose. I believe that. I actually think that is the case for sexuality in general. That sexuality is something that you have some degree of wiggle room to manipulate. As an adult. You can make decisions about how you wield your sexuality. But these pathways, these masturbatory pathways, are inborn. And basically, it's a process now of uncovering what they are. And now, if you're like in isolation in the woods, and you may never know that you have a foot fetish.
Yeah.
But now it's, oh my God, you get exposed to something and you're like, shit, that gets me. God damn it. Now I know. And I think the confusing thing about this is that we're seeing this as a personal journey, as an identity. Oh, I'm a sociosexual, or I'm a heterosexual, or I'm a demisexual. And like suddenly it's seen as something that defines the self and gives you a sense of belonging. Suddenly you can participate in all of these communities and groups. And that actually, I think, blocks people from understanding that, no, this is not about your will. This isn't about who you've chosen to be. This isn't about who you can become in the world. This is just some discovery of the primal.
It's interesting because I've decided that ultimately I'm not going to worry too much about trying to abstractly type myself based on whom I'm attracted to as a generality, because at the end of the day, if you're going to fuck someone, it's one specific person, and you're going to get to know them, and you're going to choose to form a relationship with them or have a one-night stand and never see them again, whatever it is, right? But people are individuals at the end of the day, and they're types, and that's who you're going to be getting to know. And so the fact that when you first met them and you're having that initial, and you're making guesses and you're curious about who they are, right? That certainly gets the attraction going. And then if you're still into them after you get to know them, or if they're totally disillusioning, right? Then you move on, right? But nevertheless, to seek your sexuality as, oh, I like blondes or I like feet or any of this, yes, but more than that, I think love and human relations and human attractions in a healthy sense, it's going to get past that pretty soon. Unless
Yeah.
you're just a serial polyamorous or something like this, whose hedonism is about just constantly meeting new people and chasing the fun of new adventures all the time, then why do you need a type after you've found a good lasting relationship? If you're playing around, you're gonna in an open relationship, sure, it makes sense, right? If you're gonna turn sex into a hobby, but most people aren't gonna turn sex into a formalized hobby. That's something that is always going to be marginal. It's always going to be niche. If sex is so important to you, in the sense you're saying that it's like you've made it your primary focus to focus on that explicitly, it can be it's distorting for everyone else when these hyper minute categorizations enter the wider lexicon. Because if two people don't need to know that they're in a trad wife relationship just for whatever reason, according to some pervert's ontology that got made up on the internet 10 years ago, they don't want to hear it. And that's what the culture war is about. That degree of open sexuality is never going to be a majority in the civilized world. And if it does, then we're not the civilized world.
I think the interesting thing for me here is the way in both the conservative position and also what I'd call the naive liberal position, both ultimately reacting to what is the absurdity of the sex drive. The conservatives, by creating an image of the perfect man and woman, the perfect relationship, the perfect marriage, whatever the cultural or religious institution basically sanctions the form being, and then everything that outside of the form is decadent or other or troublesome. And then the naive liberal reacts to the absurdity of the drive by affirming it, but trying to make that the core of the identity. And that's where you end up with this absurd hyper-categorization where I'm like a demi-pan lupus quadrosexual.
Yeah.
Because I have this fantasy that moves through me, this drive that moves through me and seeks after particular images for desire. And so this is me, and this is everything about me, and the world should come to know me through this. This is fundamental because it feels so fundamental to me that it must be my identity. And I like there's the line by Jacques Lacan where he's interviewed in a French magazine at some point, and he basically, someone's asking about the sexual revolution, and he says, look, I'm not against it, but it's not going to solve any of the problems of sex that people think it's going to solve. Just flipping from repression to affirmation. The affirmation is actually just still a repression of the traumatic otherness of the drive. And the outcome, I was just reading Cadell Larth's paper on psychoanalysis and Buddhism yesterday. And I like the way he describes the psychoanalytic ethic of basically being what you're trying to do is cut through these imaginary fantasies that your desire chases, whether it's the foot fetish or whatever it is, and the desire to be known as a foot fetishist. But still, the drive moves through you anyway. And that's what they call enjoying the symptom. It's like, it doesn't go away. You don't get rid of it. The conservative fantasy would be to get rid of it. The naive liberal fantasy would be like, this is me. It's no, you're an empty abyss, yet something is moving through you anyway.
Okay, that's perfect. An empty abyss. Because let's say you have an addiction. Thinking about the thing constantly that you're trying to avoid is the worst thing you can do. The most important thing you can do is find something else that you don't know what it is yet. You're not complete, and most of the world is still unknown to you. I know nothing about homesteading, I was going to say, but I can't plant a garden if my life depended on it. If I opened a book, I'd learn a bunch of new things. If I went out there and stumbled and threw some seeds on the ground in my garden, right? I don't know what I don't know about why it is people love planting their own crap in a patch of dirt outside their house, if I can sort of sound dismissive about it. But it's an example for me of the way to not focus on a thing is to drown it out with so many other new novel things that maybe you're into, or maybe they bore you and you force yourself through it anyway just to learn more. That's something books used to do. Sorry to bring it all back to media, but if I try to read whole books on a subject and supposed to look for the thing that I want to know, and what the internet is set up to do is to help us find exactly the fact that we want fast. And what we do when we do that is we lose all the context and all the other things that you learn accidentally on the adventure of finding the thing that you want. Every figure, if you use the language from Gestalt psychology, every figure is surrounded by ground. This is what artists who were going through the Oriental Vogue at the early of the 20th century, they love Japanese artwork and Chinese artwork because they're more about the landscape than it is about the thing that there's a picture of, right? This awareness of the total ground. And so much of our world is a total ground of mystery, right? If you don't know anything about how cars work except what Consumer Reports tells you to buy, or if you don't know anything about how finance works except what your financial advisor tells you to invest in, and if you never take the time to learn something new, you're never going to find all the other things you can get a flow state about, you can cultivate a flow state about, you can get excited about, you can develop mastery in. You can get into flow states and learn and feel good about yourself and build an identity out of so many things other than sex. Sex is just the thing you're sublimating at the core of all those other things. Right? To mature is to sublimate a great degree of your animal drives into productive pro-social activities upon which civilization is built. And if you're not competent in things that you practice diligently, that you're not coached into, brought into, or take the time to work on yourself, then you're only ever going to play with the things around us that are easy to play with, which is the screen on your TikTok and your dick or your clit. Like, those are the things that take no learning to learn how to play with. But if you want to play with the operating system on your computer, or if you want to play with making money on the stock market, I'm not saying that's exactly the best thing to do in the world, but at least you had to learn a shitload of stuff and get good at it and play in these advanced spaces, which most people can't sense. It's invisible to them. They haven't done the cultivation of training or perception to see those aspects of the world behind the superficial. What's behind the superficial elements in your world? Go get lost seeing the invisible. And that's going to do a lot to round out your character. It won't change your sexuality, but it'll give you more things that keep you busy in a day when you're bored.
This is where it's interesting, right? That, again, referring back to the men's conference, it's becoming more and more of a thing for guys, rather than having this, at least when it comes to masturbation, a sense of, oh, it's a bad thing, avoid it. But like, more and more the leaders are talking about cultivating it, really exploring the ways to touch yourself and feel yourself. More and more people are getting into not coming. Like,
Onanism.
like at this, what was it? At the festival, there's a thing of like, how many guys in here practice not coming? And it's half the auditorium put their hands on. Of course, this is a self-selecting scene, but it is interesting that this is where the discourse is going, and I can understand why. I practice these things myself, and they do work. It opens up like sex is a form of martial art, which I think a lot of men are really attracted to frame it that way.
Delayed gratification, we all know, is a good skill to have, but it's better applied to not touching your savings account than it is like not touching your dick, I think. Like, all these things can be sublimated into productive activities that aren't all about immediate sensuous involvement right now. I want to feel something right now. Oh, this isn't making me feel something right now, so forget that. You turn off a movie 20 minutes in because it's not good yet. There goes like 90% of some of the best cinema on the planet, but it wasn't exciting for you. No, this overeating drive for sensation right now is, I think, a compensation for our otherwise total lack of embodiment and alienation from our body. We're totally out of our body. We're out of our heads. And then we just want constant reminders that our body exists. And so we chase awareness, tactility, we chase touch, we chase sensation in the most direct, easy, short-circuited route possible, which in autoheterosexuality means dressing up and looking at yourself in a mirror, just chasing the feel-goods, the euphoria, the flow state all the time. We have to get comfortable with distractions and boredom and popping our bubble, and in ways that will get us more mature on the other end.
This is where there's something I'm curious to riff with you as well, because I think a lot about McLuhan's tetrad concept, particularly inversions, and the way certainly what's happened with our podcasting communities is that it's this whole digital sphere, but really everybody is craving the physical meetings. And when we get together in physical space, that's the real fucking thing. And now and this is why I was saying to you earlier, like, we need to get you over to Europe. It's like I was saying, Raven's been staying in my house for the last month, as has Kettle last. And we've just got so much done and just deepened our bonds with each other. And now it's Like being on the digital, being on the podcast is just a commentary to what's going on in the physical. So it's reversed. It's the physical is the real deal. And what I find fascinating with porn, the mainstream kind of conversation is about AI porn and endless generation of the imaginary. I find myself speculating that the really interesting thing to be thinking is, what is the total reversal of that? It's basically porn as live performance, the Roman orgy, essentially. That's where I'm interested in thinking. I keep trying to encourage people I know to start it going as a business. Nobody seems to be starting it. So if anybody wants to start it with me, drop me a message.
Wait, you mean just live porn?
Potentially live porn.
That happens already.
It does, but it's not very mainstream.
Yeah, I don't think it will ever be mainstream. I think it's going to be boutique.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I'm with you. I'm with you. So can we please start a boutique porn company already?
Yeah, it's like the porno theater, except it's not a theater. It's live porno theater.
Yeah. No,
they have that down in the red light district in Amsterdam.
Of course they do. You're in Amsterdam, but nobody else has that shit.
Yeah, but this is what I would like, a live porn experience. You just go to an orgy, right? Like I don't know. Yeah. And then that kind of tickles the voyeurism, exhibitionism, dimension of sexuality.
Yeah, you're saying. Okay, so what's the difference between live porn and exhibitionism? Is that I assume porn is sought out exactly for the generalizable, replaceable, cog-like nature of the casting of the porn actors. I need someone who fits this role. Whereas exhibitionism is probably two people who know each other very well and know how to fuck each other, and it's hot because they know each other so well. They got actual intimacy.
Interestingly enough, in order to have live couple performances in Amsterdam, the couple has to be married.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Isn't that super interesting? Yeah, I think that I totally take your point where you're saying about needing to sublimate the sexual drives and like the immediacy of just like getting off and coming to all these like images. But at the same time, I think there's also an invisible world of animalistic dominance hierarchy that's playing out in any social space that you're walking into. And it's, at least for me, I was extremely naive to this as an adult. As a young woman, I had no idea that there was all of this crazy like sexual energy around, or like the way that dominance worked around me. And it's only through conscious exploration of the sexual that aspect, that invisible, has been revealed. And the demystification of sexuality and the animal dimensions of human interaction and social space has opened up a lot for me, just understanding the kind of invisible architecture of human interaction.
It was Camille Pallia's sexual persona that really, it took a long, dense book to blow me into that level of perception of awareness. And when I'm running my store and I'm in a flow state, dealing with customers and stuff, and I'm just making shit happen and everything's going great. And then I find that gentlemen half my age will call me sir on a regular basis. And I never used to, I was just like, there's just like a show of respect. But it's also like, I'm dominating the scene in a sense. Which, when you think about it sexually, that makes so much more sense, because it's such a animal magnetism, invisible style of, if you walk into a room and you just naturally make someone else's skin bristle up, right? It's pre-conscious. It happens at such an instinctual level. And I think that is something largely sexual. It's everywhere.
Just like a big man is just like going to have a dominant effect, especially on small people. There's just these things.
And again, this is one of these things that people try to analyze and people try to duplicate, and they try to take it apart as and the guys walking out with this ridiculous swagger down the street thinking that they're pulling it off, and they look absolutely fucking ridiculous. These are the things you can't analyze consciously or train yourself to do, in a sense. At least this is what conversations about authenticity come down to for me, is, people who are sexy aren't trying.
Yeah, in men's work, they talk a lot about archetypes, and I like this theory of actually sexiness is really just embodying what you are. So if you are the big, muscly, macho guy, then absolutely be that. But if you are the kind of skinny, dorky guy, who knows loads of nerdy stuff, then fucking train that and hone that and then impress people by how much you're able to dance verbally and intellectually.
It works.
Certainly does. Yeah. That's a good one.
And it's funny that, I guess, to bring in a bit of Rene Girard here, because we're in these mass societies and then mass mediated on top of that, it's so easy to get caught in chasing the images of what you think sexiness and attractiveness is. And there's always a vogue, whether it's the Marlboro Man aesthetic or the trimmed football player aesthetic or wherever. And it's the same for women, whether it's the kind of like busty blonde or the like slim, petite, dark hair, and then people try to modulate themselves to become that. I think one of the things that's both so interesting and I find so horrifying about Instagram is the amount of women who are just getting lip filler. I think lip filler looks fucking terrible, and they're everywhere, just trying to look more black.
That was more of a thing 10 years ago, the duck face phenomenon.
It might just be that
when everyone was calling it
everywhere.
that. Is it everywhere? See, cosmetics. This is another thing. When I was a kid, I would break into my parents' bed, the door was unlocked. But I'd go up to my mom's vanity and pull out some lipstick and smear it all over my face and fuck around for 20 minutes. And then it'd look ridiculous and she'd find me, go, look at you, and take a picture. But I wasn't getting into a craft of learning how to properly, at a professional level, apply cosmetics properly as something that you improve at and get better at and get rewards for and viscerally get involved into, right? There's play to explore stuff, and then there's learning and taking seriously something which society has designed and prepared for you as a skill set that you can measure your improvement on at the long-term scale, right? Kids playing with makeup is not what kids playing with makeup was 20 years ago, I promise you. It's a completely different thing now with the smartphone. And cosmetic advice has always been what sells magazines. 100 years ago, 5 easy tricks to please your husband launched Cosmopolitan magazine, right? Like marketing and business models are all built upon all of these insecurities about ourselves. And being aware of all of that is such an important part of being earnest, to not fall into the trap of trying to systematize and study these aspects of our identity and our embodiment as though they were a trade, like plumbing or carpentry or something, because that's how cosmetics is to someone who works in the film industry. But the fact that's what cosmetics is to every girl in high school, the fact that girls feel, and now boys, because there's more money in a larger market, feel the need to become good at the term for applying cosmetics in a mirror and is generally called personal grooming, actually. And that's what it is. It's narcissistic grooming of your own self. It's social grooming as well, when society is telling you how to personally groom yourself. I'm not sure why I got onto that, but that's
the duck lips.
It's a more sophisticated point than my moralism against bimbofication. You saved it.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about body modification and cosmetics and female sexuality and kind of cultural drift around sexuality, and especially when it comes to women, because there's so much of this just innate evolutionary animal drive to extend beauty as much as possible and in competition with other women. And so when your competitive field is like every single woman that exists on the planet right now, on Instagram, it's plus AI enhancement and all of these tricks and tips. I think it does accelerate whatever insecurities drive a careening into runaway competitive dynamics between women, and it ends up stimulating a lot of alteration, a lot of autoerotic alteration for the performance of the self in social space. But the way that I've been thinking about it as well is the necessity for finding energy sinks. When you live in an urban environment, you have energy, you don't know what to do with it. You need to put it somewhere. And sexuality, having sex, is one of these potential energy sinks, but so is grooming. Just grooming oneself is an energy sink. Going to the gym is an energy sink. Whatever things you decide to do on the day-to-day, taking drugs, it all comes back to you in some form of body modification. some alteration of the way that the body is in the environment. And these things, people take conscious control over them in some cases and turn themselves into pieces of art, or they turn into furries, or they turn into bimbos, or whatever. They take control of their image and turn themselves into something through either an unconscious process of nudging, through some sort of technologically mediated process or mimetic process, or as a some weird art project, or like some masturbatory fetish thing. It's yeah.
Self-awareness is a term that a young trans friend of mine used to describe herself. And she was telling me what her kinks were and what she was into and all this stuff. And then she said that she was a virgin and had never had a partner before and never really had sex or touched someone. I was like, you're saying you're self-aware about all this stuff, but you've never touched anybody. And I was like, and then it really is like, I had a hard time, like, just politely be like, maybe you're not as self-aware as you think you are. We do exist in a world where other people are looking at us, and we exist in them, through their biases, through their judgments, through their appraisals of us, and that's a reflection of ourselves that we need to take seriously and own, even though so much of it is out of our control. And the ability of a city to find just the people who will get you as you are and accept you as you are today, and to filter out 9/10 of people who will never understand you, is it's a pathway to alienation from that. And so energy sinks, I think, can easily become these indulgences in the things that, again, it goes back to immediate gratification. It's hard to stumble and be awkward and embarrassing in front of people at a thing you're bad at, and then do it again today, tomorrow, and then do it again today, next week, or to go on a string of bad dates and embarrass yourself and learn who you are in the crowdsourced opinions of people who actually do recognize that you suck at this thing or that you're a shitty person, right? Like, it's really hard. Like, shitty person is a moral judgment, but people who have had interventions staged on their behavior by well-meaning people who've come out of it for the better will acknowledge that they needed to have their behavior corrected, right? But we don't want to seek out those conversations. We don't want self-awareness about how cringy we are, because cringe is one of those horrible things you can have, right? This is why shame is so tied up with these pride arguments, is because people are trying to directly assert their pride in the face of the shame that they feel for themselves. And so many things about our sexuality are completely wrongly shamed, right? But then again, also, most sexuality in public at all has generally been taboo up until very recently, like repressively, obsessively, like neurotically so, in a sense that we're driving people crazy. But like you said, the sexual revolution in Lacan's appraisal certainly wasn't going to fix anything. Letting loose is, it hasn't done much better. I don't know. I think it all comes down to learn to have the willpower to reach a stage of skill at other things that you'll find rewarding, that aren't so animal and base and carnal. You can do the animal, base, and carnal stuff, but the people who focus on that are always asking to be marginalized. And when I say asking for, they know where the library is. If they want to self-improve, right?
Here's a library card. Go learn something. Then you can hang out.
And then you can talk about something else maybe sometimes. And then people will be more likely to hang out with you. And they'll put up with the stuff that is you. But yeah, people aren't well-rounded. That's all.
This is why I love the hetaira as an archetype or a character. Hetaira is an ancient Greek word. They were highly educated courtesans in Athens, and so they were some of the most powerful women in society. They were invited to the philosophy symposiums, and they were trained to think philosophically and do art, and they were also dancers and prostitutes and all of that, and they'd be at these intensely cultured parties. And I love this whole, it's also part of, I guess, my romantic classical aesthetic, having studied classics and being British and all of that. Yes, it's all part of my imaginary, but I love it anyway. And this idea of having serious culture at the same time as having expansive, expressive, rich sexuality. I think it's easy to get caught in a binary of thinking that expression is decadence and elitism is restraint.
Yeah, exactly. You can be a sexual person and also be able to fit in a room and have interesting conversations with lots of people in a context which is totally, I was gonna say sterile, but you know what I mean, non-sexual. You have to be able to fit in with the normies and then have fun with the freaks and not feel alienated from either one. And that takes cultivation, exploration, and becoming just so much more than you are today. If what you are today is focused on your problem or your hang up, the solution is to drown that out with exposure to new things, because you can't know who. If you've got an idea of who you want to be in 5 years, that means that the projected 5 years from now that you can try to pull off is the sort of thing that an immature person like you would come up with, and not something that you're trying to grow into something that you yourself can't even contemplate, because they're smarter than you are. The person you want to become should be smarter than you, and you can't imagine what it's like to be them. But the same way children don't understand adults, your relation to your future self should be full of uncertainty and vagueness. And yes, that's more startling. But if you think you actually want to become in the future, if you think you want to match what you want to be to what you are, then you're selling yourself short, I guess, is what I'm saying. And finding the new, it's always something out there about the world that you didn't know. It's not this internal navel gazing of more psychometric tests, or like Myers-Briggs or the Big Five, or stop studying your own genetics, stop like your own types, and go find something in the world that you can do.
Yeah, I love this. This reminds me of this passage from W.B. Yeats that I've been thinking about a lot. I wrote about it in an essay recently called Razor Laced with Perfume, that people can find if they want to read it. But where he talks critically of the culture, there's three things, and I don't know if I remember them all, but of gradual improvement and the refinement of manners and law. And he says, look, this is fine, but this isn't where artistic inspiration comes from. This isn't where new culture is birthed from. The poet and the musician, the artist, philosopher knows that his moment comes in a great explosion. And we have a culture, it's very easy to get caught up in thinking that we're just going to gradually refine. This is even where I'm critical, say, of a lot of the metamodern communities who think that they've figured everything out and now we just need to train ourselves to be a bit more metamodern, or a bit more open, or a bit more conscious, or a bit more better at non-violent communication, or whatever it is. I like that in the men's movement, there's more of a training on phallic explosivity. Is no, if you need to call someone out and if you need to fucking do something, you need to fucking punch. Literally. It's the energy sometimes of punching someone in the face, sublated, but going for that.
I live in Canada, so we're all so damn polite that it's very difficult to learn how to be assertive and stuff. And then when you are, it's like shocking and alluring sometimes, and or disruptive and offensive, and you run out of the room before someone, freaks out. It's funny. Yeah, this thing about you can try to structure your cultivation and your growth. That won't stop the changes from being explosive anyway. There's no hiding away. If you're actually doing the cultivation, then yeah, eventually you're just going to fall into a pit. You're going to have epiphanies. You're going to have total breakdowns. Go ahead. Try to structure it. If you actually are improving, nothing's going to go to plan anyway, and that's okay.
Yeah, I love that point. And you still got to fucking do the dis. It's like I'm learning more and more with the guitar. I still got to fucking do the scales. Raven, I hope you're doing your scales, by the way.
I'm
calling you out live on air.
Question.
Everybody who's listening to this, Raven needs to practice her vocal scales and arpeggios.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
So now the whole community needs to hold you accountable for this. It's not just me. Sorry.
It's true. I do need to work on that. So do you think sex is going to be uncool in the future? Do you think we're going to figure it out and actually figure sex out and just be like, this is boring and now we're moving on? Or is it just going to remain a persistent issue?
Well, sex should remain persistently present. It shouldn't be an issue. Here's where the Phil's book is interesting, because if autoheterosexuality is a norm, what does that? It's interesting. It's noticeable when it comes to a minority of people who are doing such a attention getting or activity as cross-dressing or transvestism or taking hormones and all these other ways of transitioning. But doesn't that imply that even other people are still just in love with themselves in more invisible ways? Right? It largely, right, love of yourself, love of an image of yourself is narcissism. And by love, I don't mean grandiose thoughts, a deep attachment to, hate it or love it, right? This idea of an image that's outside of you, and that's your reputation when it's actually what other people think of you. But when it's an image on a computer screen that you're shaping or cultivating, or that, you know, you can only fool or persuade a subset of people to acknowledge and affirm, then you're always going to marginalize yourself from the larger group, the unknown, the norms, the other extremes, the other camps. You're not going to be able to sympathize or empathize or enter their headspace. You won't have a theory of mind for understanding this larger social trends that are happening with people you can't relate to. Because you're so attached to your own self-image, for better or for worse. They're self-loathing narcissists, right? You're sad that you're not going to suffer the breakdown of that image to then grow into someone who's more aware of a broader swath of how other people think and empathize, right? If you're not going to suffer the breakdown and the cringing over and the atonement for actual guilty things you were guilty of, and you're not going to apologize for the way you treated your ex girlfriend in high school and all the other things that we feel guilt about and are running from, and the ends that were never tied off and the unclosed things, right? People have tortured histories with their past. There's things they can't forgive, all this stuff. And fighting off the processing or the healing from that is a large reason for sticking to the narrow straits of this sensuality, of this identity affirmation, of this staying comfortable, right? It's really sad that psychoanalysis and talk therapy couldn't scale up to the civilizational structure, and we got left with the DSM checklist in hour-long things, right? But everyone needs talk therapy to go through stuff, and loving yourself often means changing into someone you can respect, and that's a lot harder than seeking affirmation for who you are. And that is something that's behind the all the fights we're having, the issues over sex, because the issues over sex aren't about sex. I feel contradictory to my usual assumption because I'm a Freudian. I think everything's secretly about sex, but the issues about sex are not about sex. They're about people using sex as an immediate gratification to escape figuring out their own shit and getting their act together. And then currently, politically, systemically, we've created this very easy way to instant affirmation politically through the very well-intentioned activism, which has created the current LGBTQ milieu, which has got now so much money behind it. It's just, it's so easy. It's just a mint that it's reactions against the economics of it and the intrusion on other people's kids' lives. That's what the intrusion of other people's kids' lives, saying, "Oh, your child's just like me. I'm going to help them grow into the future self that I know they're going to be. Because I know when they grow up, they're going to be just like me." Conservatives are correct. That is grooming. It's out there. The internet's a very dangerous fucking place. Don't throw your kid alone on the internet without guidance. Not expect them to get fucking attacked from all sides by. Okay, the internet kind of selects for people who would be on the internet all day. No, that's a little logical, but that's what the internet is full of, people who would spend all their days on the internet. So that's who you're exposing that's who you're exposing yourself to, first of all. So the internet is very strong selection bias for a certain sort of person already, even before the sex stuff. So all these technological things and these issues of ourselves, our own understanding of our identities, our narratives, the things we're running away from, that's all behind the sex stuff. Yeah, we can be at ease and get past the sex issues. Sex won't become boring. No, it's not going to become boring if it became a regular part of your evening time, and otherwise lived and got out there, were regular and not a creep during the day. That would be great. Isn't that the balance everyone should aspire to? All right.
Yes.
I'm not saying you have to be monogamous. I'm not saying you have to be anything, but to view everyone else's existence as a judgment on you because they make you feel ashamed of yourself, you should probably search for the root of that shame in yourself in deeper ways than just what you jacked off to last night.
Yeah, definitely. Very much. So important to make peace with your past selves and stop just mutilating yourself in the present out of some desire to run away from previous behavior. Guilt is a bitch. Shame is a bitch. And I think it really does come from real things that happen. At least that's been my process. Every kind of mental problem I had, I can trace back to decisions I made that I was not proud of. I was like, I had to resolve that for myself and then move on and do productive things with myself in order to.
Was it fun?
Free.
Did you enjoy the work?
The process?
Yeah.
Process it's really difficult. You have to rest. It really feels like the dark night of the soul when you're facing these parts of yourself. And I think what you said before, getting comfortable with boredom, like knowing how to sit with who you are and look outward into the world and be curious, just having those moments alone with yourself and realizing, here I am, I'm sitting on this park bench and all I can think about is my shame or the thing that, some fixation that I have, and I'm not even noticing all of the things around me. I'm completely cut off from the world outside and stuck inside of this bubble, and it's boring. You just get tired of yourself and you're ready to look outward. And I think there's so many forces too that are looking for people who are in that state and just keeping them there and milking that pattern for extractive purposes.
Absolutely.
Everyone's just trying to make a buck.
Absolutely. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. If your teacher doesn't want you to graduate so they can kick you out at the end of a set amount of time, then you're probably not finding a very worthwhile teacher. If your kids aren't going to grow up and get their own life, all these things, but these extractive processes, it's so ubiquitous that we have a hard time. We could go for hours talking about the way that economics wants to keep us in bondage, and I understand why in bondage, but I understand why. Like, this is the appeal of Marxist theory. It cuts right to the core of that in the economic realm. I think you can go deeper at the level of human behavior, at the level of education systems, than what Marxist theory has to offer. I don't think it's the ground of anything, but within the economic domain, it explains a lot, right? It's funny because I find one reason that I love my intellectual friends, but they get so hung up on the theory and its ubiquity, because the fact money is everywhere, that I often get frustrated with all my left-wing friends whom I love. But also it's like, yeah, there's something else going on, guys. Look at the media. And, hey, I'm a McLuhan nerd, and I'm like, okay, but you're right. So that's the problem with all this desire to have answers, is that we tend to glom onto formalized systems that explain everything, and then we can't get past the systems. And that's where my last piece for Default Friends Substack is about how we need words to talk ourselves out of the systems everyone else has talked themselves into, because you can't change a conversation if you use the same terms or if you fall into the framing that everyone else is already using. We don't acknowledge the frames that our conversations take place in, that came out of good scientific literature, good theoretical literature, but you can't build your worldview out of a mosaic of different great thinkers' systematic structures, right? There's more to perceiving reality, there's more to intelligence than syntheses of the great minds of the 20th century or the 18th century or anything like that. There is the raw embodied animal perception of the world. And that's poetic, and it's exploratory, and it's exploring the negative, the absence, the lacks, and maybe you'll find words for it, but maybe you'll just be a mute exploring something that you weren't prepared for, and that's okay too. That's something that smart people struggle with a lot, is avoidance of the things that they don't already have words to prepare themselves to think about.
It's like in our culture, we've been trained to consider the academics and the scholars as the highest manifestation of the intellect. And I always love Lacan and Oscar Wilde make this point in different ways, but essentially Oscar Wilde's way of saying it is so brilliant, right? I won't nail it completely, but it's like in matters of no importance, style, not substance, is what matters. But in matters of great importance, style, not substance, is what matters. And of course, this is Oscar Wilde, a great master of style. Lacan makes a similar point, I forget his way, but similar, that basically the style with which someone speaks, or with which a text is presented, or indeed with which a work is exhibited, is part of the substance of the thing itself. The subject and the substance, Hegelian point, are intimately interwoven. But we have a tendency to idealize this kind of abstract, impersonal knowledge that pretends towards a perfection precisely because it's transcended the speaker, which is useful in certain realms for sure. It's like when I'm in a hospital, I want to be treated by someone who's not on an ego trip as much as possible. But when I'm at a rock fucking concert, I want to watch Jimmy Page who's on an ego trip.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's this problem in programming with the myth of the rock star programmer who screw it, I'll do it myself, and they hate everyone else, and they're just a bore, but the software wouldn't work except for this one person who knows how everything works, and then they glom onto that. HR departments are generally trying to kill that trend off as much as possible, as you can understand. But no, for me, substance is the thing that we're both pointing at and looking at together while we're talking. There's substance to your words when what you're saying is indicating something, and I'm going, yeah, I see it too. If you can't have substance when these abstractions are something that you're trying to learn with the hopes that maybe you'll see it out there one day in the wild and then finally get, right? Like those conversations are all abstract. We co-create our shared perception, our common perception. Our identity becomes larger than ourselves, kind of like our sexuality, you were saying earlier. If you watch porn with a friend, or in the sense you were describing at the conference there, it's like sharing in a scene which is outside of yourself and outside of the other person. You're not talking about each other, you're talking about something that's outside of the both of you, is a much better way to grow together than to try and directly understand each other. I can't get to know you by looking at you half as well as or talking to you about you, or asking you about me. What am I doing wrong, Raven? Oh my God. I'm not going to learn anything about myself half as good as if you and I were looking at some third thing that neither one of us were involved in or knew about, and we're trying to figure it out together and painting understanding of it and talking about that third thing, that third missing thing that's outside of us that we're growing and co-developing with each other. That's the surest way to bonding, to empathy, to understanding, in my mind. So forget the narcissism of trying to understand each other or label yourself or recognize yourself in the mirror and try to get that image. Go explore the world out there with someone else, and you won't find yourself, you'll become yourself.
I like that a lot. Do you think about family a lot? Do you think about family formation and civilization and all this stuff, or is that kind of peripheral subject to you?
Yeah, I think about family. I'd like a family. I'm gay. I'm hung up on the whole like two dad thing, and I know that's very regressive of me, but it's fine when it's anyone else. But when it's me, it's personal. So now I got to be all neurotic about it.
Yeah.
You make a great dad, Clinton. I wish you were my daddy.
Oh, shucks. I do think about family. It's so many people have, okay, here's my understanding of half of what's wrong with the internet is that it grew out of America, and America has got its own very specific homegrown style of Protestant Christianity, which is particularly evangelical and repressive and weird and flat earthy in lots of young earth creationist stuff. And so the first generation of smart people who cultivated internet culture were all the people who ran away from their crazy hick family, moved to the city, and said, oh my God, Christianity and religion is ridiculous. Found Richard Dawkins and the rest of the Four Horsemen, right? And that's like the intellectual backdrop for where all of our conversations are growing out of, our reactions against smart people reacting against heavily moralistic, repressive American religion. And I'm not sure that Europeans or people in other continents quite take for granted that's where modern background, like modern atheism, comes from, is that very specific, very cultural history, right? And so from that, a lot of these people are escaping their families. Their parents were horrible. They did the right thing. moving on. But a lot of the sentiment against against parental control is informed by this backdrop as well. And so the fights that are happening in American schools about the rights of teachers to keep children's transitions away from their parents, and the rights of parents have to say, no, I don't want explicitly sexual material in my kid's library, and all these other things, right? They're all premised on this very strange idea that, here's a question that I don't have an answer for. Maybe you guys do. Why is the nuclear family something that conservatives are supposed to celebrate? Because I thought the nuclear family was the breakdown of the collective family. I thought that the big family with their aunts and uncles all in town and grandmas taken care of by all of our kids because they all live in the same, the big family is the good thing. And then the nuclear family, I thought, was supposed to be that messed up, alienated, locked up group of 3 or 4 or 5 people who are severed from their ties. I thought the nuclear family was the breakdown of the family. Why the hell is political discourse like, we have to go back to the nuclear family? No, you don't. No, you don't. You want to go back to like old Italy where all the old ladies are making pasta sauce with their 27 grandkids. That's what you want to go back to, isn't it? I thought that was the ideal.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're totally right. It's a weird construction. I think there's a pretty good theory that some people we're actually going to interview later this week proposed, Simone and Malcolm Collins, who advocate for the neo-corporate family, which is the exact family structure that you're talking about. They think it's because of film, basically of the mass production of like TV shows that started in the 1950s when that model of the family was constructed because of suburbia and this post-war dream that was being constructed in order to transition people out of this very different, very dark place of World War II. And it just cemented in like the sitcom genre, and bigger families weren't very popular. There were a couple shows that had bigger families, but they didn't actually end up sticking around in the same way that the mom, the dad, and the 2 kids construction. So they think it's like a cultural fluke that's been biased by television.
Yeah, that makes a great deal of sense. And of course, I'm inclined to believe it. The actual layout of the suburbs as well. Sure, the way America was built up. Again, this is another thing where Marxist theory generally does a very good job of examining the things that truly are social constructs that we do take for granted. And it is mostly marketing and government planning and things that are then have this romantic patina of the ideal life painted on top. At the same time, I think I loved growing up in a house with a big backyard and a barbecue and a giant place for my pets to roam around. And I don't think that's all just something that you can easily socially construct out of people again to be like, oh no, that's evil.
No.
I got a couple more thoughts on the question as well. It's a great question, right? Why do conservatives idolize the nuclear family?
Yeah.
Because there's a kind of Marxist angle on it that you've already alluded to. Connected with that is something that I've heard Bard say several times. I don't know the history of it myself, but the nuclear family was invented by a Prussian bureaucrat in the 19th century precisely because it's stiff and sexually repressive. So it meant people would work harder because there's more sexual energy that needs to be sublimated. So that's certainly an interesting theory to consider. I don't know anything about it myself. The other thing that's on my mind, though, which still connects to this question of the particular branch of American Christianity, it's there's something in the nuclear family structure, especially from the male perspective. I don't know how it is from the female perspective, but it allows for an idolization of the wife, the woman, as the perfect one to complete me. Something that I've heard from several people, including my Romanian girlfriend, is that in these other cultures, more Catholic or more Orthodox or wherever, where there are bigger and broader family structures, these cultures are often, they have a paradoxical tolerance towards, what would you say, like sexual deviance, where like, it's like in Catholic cultures, it's expected that the husband might sleep around and cheat. And it's bad, but it also happens and people forgive it. People are able to hold it. Maybe it's the same for women as well. I don't know so well, but I've definitely noticed, again, just symptomatically from people I've been around, people who are really like neoconservatives, or I call them trad modern conservatives, who are really big on nuclear family structure and obsessed with the need to get married and to have a wife, and also with this image of woman as this pure thing, and women are pure in a way that men aren't because of this. I see it as a fear, essentially, of the polymorphous perversity of female sexuality.
It sounds like meta autosexuality. You're not in love with your wife. You're in love with having the wife that completes you as a man.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a very nice way to look at it. What do you think about this from a female perspective, Raven? Is there anything that aligns with it? Maybe not, but I'm curious because it's definitely a male fantasy, a kind of male riff on the Madonna whore complex that resolves it by wanting to go nuclear precisely to repress the whore intensely.
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think from my own perspective, like the idea of being in a nuclear family feels like being trapped. Feels like someone's going to trap me. So I think the idea that there's some subset of men who fantasize about this as a way of resolving this tension of trying to only see one side of the woman, and maybe even connected to mate guarding behavior. Like it's an extension of mate guarding behavior. You have your wife in her house and the kids, and then also potentially as well, raising more than 2 children is extremely difficult. I think it's not in most people's practical imagination to have more than 2 children. So it could just be some kind of lack of imagination. And then also maybe something that has to do with not knowing how to deal with female sexuality, which fair enough. Female sexuality it's polymorphic. It has lots of dimensions to it. And it's not something that I think we actually have very much literacy in. And it's certainly not openly talked about because it's a conversation that's actively shut down because there's so much darkness in it that it's difficult for a society for a mainstream or public conversation to really deal with without kind of the mimetic immune system being activated, so we can maintain the purity of the woman, or the justification of, okay, any behavior that a woman does is good because a woman has done it. These kinds of reactions.
Yeah, the political expediency of making arguments that will work is something activists, regardless. I won't go down that tangent. I'm wondering, so would you say, Raven, that female sexuality is more like protean? Like there's so much more potential there. Like you could see yourself in so many different situations, or there's just so much potential that that's what you said. You can't lock.
Literally, this is one of my problems. I'm
like one door is to close 6 others, and it's
I can't, like, I was talking to Cadell about this actually when we were at Owens. I was like, I can't imagine my future in terms of family life, the kind of person I'm going to settle down with, because there's so many possible combinations that would work. So many different things. Because latent in my that could emerge from my sexuality and also my capacity for relationality. Just like the broad capacity for I have romantic and sexual feelings towards women, which then adds a whole other dimension. I also pair bond and have romantic and sexual feelings towards men and also queer men. I love a transgender person. So I'm just like, I don't know. There's so many different possible ways that this could go.
Yeah. I actually relate. Every once in a while, a girl comes along. I'm like, fuck. I thought I figured it out. God damn it. But anyway.
God damn it. Yeah.
I think there's one thing I wish that I hadn't been told growing up as a kid is, you got so much potential. Because
God, I hate that.
Potential is nebulous. And when you when you make potential the thing of value, what you're in love with is it feels like a finite resource that you want to get more of. But potential is like diametrically opposed to achieving anything specific or setting yourself on any distant goal, because you immediately burn off most of your potential when you pick a bridge and walk it. And commitment is necessary in a relationship, and commitment is necessary to getting good at anything or doing the things I was saying. Like maturing means committing to spending a long time. If you're gonna become a musician, then practicing your scales in your instrument or your voice, you're killing off the potential for the other shit you could be doing. But to be in love with your potential is to seize up and just navel gaze and squander time going through the 6 different things that you want to do and not picking any one, and you've wasted one more day. I think I'm saying this from my own self-awareness of a major problem that I do have myself, but I think it's a problem lots of people have, and that's why they're seeking out these tests to find themselves, or vocational studies was only invented like 100 years ago at the prime of the dawn of managerial science, when Taylor, what's his name, was creating the modern factory and the modern HR representative archetype was being born, and we're going to create a science of how to create workers. Here's a test to help you find yourself. Oh, you'd be a good glassmith. You should work on that. Here's a test to find out what you should take in school. Surrendering to these mechanistic paradigms is just as bad. And that's what people were revolting against when they wanted to express themselves in the 60s and break out of these strictures of this machine society. But now we're in reverse. Now it's everyone's all potential all the time, and no one's actually channeling that potency into a specific direction to become anything of worth. And that's not completely true, but it's more of a problem. At least you can feel that way. Yeah. So yeah, learning to kill off the 6 other potential yous who you decide that you won't be is a painful one more painful thing no one wants to do.
Absolutely. Clinton, I just want to butt in quickly because we've been going for 2 hours and I'm wondering if you need to go. I can happy to keep going. This is great, but I don't know if you have a hard stop or not.
I've got something at 3, so if we want to go for 10-20 more minutes, it works for me. That's an hour from now, 3 in my time.
Yeah, let's do a few more minutes then.
Cool.
See what we wind up.
Yeah, excellent conversation. Thanks, guys. My piece was really about automation, because that's what we are as a civilized industrial and post-industrial society in the West specifically, is we make machines to do things for us, things that we used to do. And we used to make things by hand, and now we got a machine to mass produce it, and we used to add up the numbers at the end of the day by hand, and then accountants got replaced by computers, and now art can be replaced by AIs. But what we do is we're in love with our own efficiency in a mechanized society. We want to do something as efficiently as possible because we're lazy. So to get good at something is to enter a flow state, and you can do it, and you're getting better at it every time, and you're becoming more efficient, and it's like you're becoming a machine at doing this thing, and then boom, you just train a machine to come do that thing for you, and now you don't have to do it anymore. So we're just externalizing ourselves into our environment. So our material objective world, people say that computers are cold calculating things, right? But it's actually, they're all bits of like humanity accrued and built up, and they have a history, and you can find the human intention or the desires behind every level as you study them and as you get deeper into them. And while that's true about anything, to generalize, that's why I like internet history and computer history and the history of punch cards from the 1930s and 40s and all the office equipment that people were using to automate their minds, their intelligence, their rationality, and how that shaped our human conception. They used to call computers electronic brains. But now, since cognitive science became a thing, we talk about our brains like they're computers. We say that we process sensory information, or that we're good or bad at multitasking. And we take all these metaphors that, or we say that the universe is made of information. And the poet's job, McLuhan, the artist's job, is to recognize, to find all these analogies and see how they're analogies and how they're not just the base propositional facts of what's going on. No, we aren't processing sensory information. We say we're processing sensory information because we invented computers and are using them as a metaphor for our brains, which are much more complex and different than computers. To gain a perception of the things that we're using as analogies is to see the ways that our language is tricking us in all these ways, and to escape some of the nastier traps of social constructionism.
Yeah, I always loved that point that he made. Artists seeing that the artist sees the ground that everybody else takes for granted. And it also it reveals why there has to be a new art for every generation or for every era. To simply just go and mimic the old forms is ridiculous. Which is something that's happening a lot of at the moment. I was talking to my dad and he was saying, I love it. There's so many young bands who sound exactly like the bands I loved when it was the late 70s, early 80s. And it's on the one, he's taken to see a bunch of them. On the one hand, yeah, it's great. But on the other hand, it's fucking terrible because it means that the kids aren't fucking being original.
Yeah. To learn anything, you have to copy. But our world isn't made of guitar pedals and analog vacuum tube amps anymore. That's, if you're doing that, it's because it's your aesthetic, and it's because it's familiar, it's comfortable, and because you're in love with something, you're trying to reproduce that thing. At the same time, not everyone's into. I remember when Deadmau5 got big, and it was like, wait, he's not even mixing, he's just standing at a laptop. I like EDM, but where's the vinyl, man? So it's hard to say. Is music even its own discrete art anymore? Is it something that's part of something larger? Wagner was a multimedia artist with music and the bombasti and the stagecraft and the opera. Like, the confluence of many things. Like, we've gone through the multimedia stage. That was like the 20th century. Where are we now in the 21st century? Superficially, it seems like it's all remix culture and sampling, and it's stuck in this permanent nostalgia cycle.
I guess it's something that I've noticed, and Raven and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, theorizing a shift in, for example, music from performance to ceremony. And it does seem like I've noticed amongst the music industry people I know, lots of them are becoming, in their middle age, mental health gurus or shamans.
Okay.
And getting more interested in that side of the human experience as well as music. And it's everything from the people who are like the most deep tantric people to fucking people who just want to sell a bit of meditation, everything in between. But there's something in the music industry that is maybe evolving towards that. And it's been there in a while. I think the hippies, as ever pioneering, the hippies have been doing their healing arts festivals where you go and see bands, but you also don't drink, you don't do drugs, you do yoga, you do emotional circling work. And it is very hippie vibe, but the two are coming together in a way. And there's more happening in these spaces than the classical musical festivals where it's people just going to watch bands perform. And then I've just been having an email today, people talking about performing at ayahuasca ceremonies. I think that this is, at least I think, and I'm thinking affirmatively, this is the direction that, with my best creative intuition as a musician with the band Raven and I have with Salvatore, to go towards, is to try and sculpt ritualistic ceremonial spaces as part of a team.
That's so interesting. It's funny because I think of music should be political, was a feel in the 70s and 80s, and then it was like all these like charity concerts and like raising awareness about political issues, music for activism. But it seems like music for healing is something a lot deeper. That sounds like a sort of a natural progression or maturation that makes sense when what you've explained. It seems a lot healthier.
And I think that is political, but I think it's spiritual political. I think in some sense it is music for healing, but I don't really like the word healing. It's more like, just because it's very loaded in this topic. And I think part of it is as much music or ceremonies for fucking learning more about what you really are, which is not necessarily healing. It might be actually quite fucking terrifying. There might be an integration afterwards, but I think, I guess, to maybe this is a way of saying it, there's something of a dispelling of naivety that great works of art help with. Whether it's tragedy or comedy, they reveal the absurdity and the brutality and the hilarity of the human condition, which isn't necessarily the same as healing you and making you feel better.
Maybe not feel better, but we've recurred on the subject of the dark night of the soul a few times, but helping that experience along while not interfering with it, but also that's the sort of the shamanistic, or what's the other word? Hypopomp. I always forget the word. Psychopomp. Yeah, the helping someone through the transformative dissolutions of self and all these other terrifying existential things that people fall into. Therapy is probably just as equally bad as a term, but yeah, accompaniment along these experiences can be nice.
Yeah. And there's, I think, another reason why I'm slightly resistant to the language of music for healing is because something I'm seeing, there's a lot of it in London, of course, is this sort of attempt to be like, we're going to do arts for healing. So we're going to study scientifically frequencies and arts because we know they relax you, or they know we've proven now that these colors help heal you, blah, blah, blah. And actually, to me, that's a neurotic perversion of what art is. It's basically saying we know we can produce this physiological effect, and so we're going to go from A to B and use this thing. But that's actually more like, it's a form of art therapy, which is not art itself.
Agreed.
And it's important to me to point that out, because I can see actual creators getting lost in that.
Yeah. Art is a lot bigger than self-expression, and it's a lot bigger than therapy.
Yes.
Many great albums, because I think of music, many great albums have come out of the healing process of pain that the writer or the performer has healed themselves through the creation of the work. Lots of great artists come out of self-expression, but art is not synonymous with self-expression, and art is not synonymous with healing. And as an artist, I think if you're going to be an artist and you want to respect yourself, you need to grow out of yourself. You can't be so self-obsessed. And eventually you're going to have to start making art that reflects things that aren't you, or that aren't yet you. Art can be about becoming more aware of some aspect of reality or something else. It can be a reflection of your explorations of the unknown, and stop being all about expressing yourself all the goddamn time. It's getting tiring.
Yeah. And I love to go back to Yeats. He's got another point about art being, like, I forget which one it is, but in a great work of art, the entire destiny of a people that is coming to be is expressed. Its rise and fall, all in the work. I love this idea of creating towards the children of the future who haven't even been born yet, as opposed to trying to work on self-expression or on fixing this person that's actually right in front of you. And I think that aligns with McLuhan perfectly in terms of expressing the things that the age itself is unconscious of, precisely so that the people who are trying to get beyond the age, they realize that, and it allows them to see the paradoxes and the absurdities of their own age and create their destiny forwards.
Yes, I first got that idea from Otto Rank, the psychoanalyst, who he was trying to tackle the question whether, like, how is a specific piece of art that's dug up, let's say, in like an archaeology site, we say that this represents ancient Greek culture. Okay, but it's one thing made by one specific artist, right? How can a thing be an expression of an individual who made it? And also, we can claim that it expresses a culture as a whole. How is a totality of artifacts somehow summed to be an expression of a culture? And he decided that it was because artists are people who feel incomplete. There's something their culture didn't give them that they needed, and they grope into the darkness without terms, and they go into and they find the thing that was missing, and they can build back, they give back to their culture in the form of this mediated artifact, a thing that completes the puzzle piece that just the rest of their culture hasn't put together yet. And so by completing themselves and expressing themselves in this way that no one else is doing, they complete the larger puzzle for everyone else. And it means going into a place where society hasn't prepared you for, where you are on your own.
And it's a very different process to trying to fix the problems that the culture knows it has. Yeah. So that's the issue with all of this woke art, for example.
Yeah, exactly. But what's marginal to me is the things people aren't talking about. That's what I think is marginal. When I'm surrounded by people talking about it, I'm sorry. I just think that you're an activist. And lots of good things have been accomplished by activisms, but also activists have got an agenda and an axe to grind, and they got strategies and rhetoric, and they know how to do propaganda better than anyone else. Sorry, I'm not going to take your word on it. That's why I got a real artists should be exploring the margins, and the margins are the places no one seems to be going. And that's a lot more difficult to do and come back again healthily and return and be accepted. That's a funny thing. I remember the first time I read, Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And the book is set up like, you can go and find the end of the journey and then like dwell there. Buddha sitting under the tree, cross-legged, right, in nirvana. Or some Western mythologies actually include a whole other part about coming back again. And that's completely different, right? It's like the personal journey doesn't end when you find yourself. That's when it starts all the fuck over again. Come back again. Now go learn everyone who the hell everyone else is, right? Start all over. Lose yourself. Completely different process.
Yeah, that's the problem with all the new age narcissists. The goal of all of their transcendence and all of their healings is this perfect state of unity with oneself and nature. And then they just sit in their little room with the 12 other people who dress like them and have the same aesthetic as them and don't have anything to do with the culture at large.
When I was going through the gay district in Montreal last summer, it was nice to see all the little old nuns walking around surrounded by like the leather dudes and stuff, and they're just like saying hi and talking to everybody, and I was like, there you go, that's what being a nun is about. Go walk around the red light district, and like they're in the world. They're there. They're not locked up in a convent some of the day, but no, get the fuck out.
Yeah, go to the leather bar.
Yeah, straight up.
This might be a great place to wrap up, guys.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed our conversation a lot. Thank you so much for inviting me, Raven and Owen.
Yeah, it was amazing. I'm so glad I got to meet you finally. A huge fan of your work, and hopefully we can talk more in the future.
Absolutely. I'm in.
Yeah, Clinton, it gets better every time we talk, man.
Thanks.
As I said, so much potential.
Oh my God, so much potential. You grow so much every time we see you.
So much potential for you here in the leather bars of Europe. Believe me, we know everybody.
Thanks for inviting me on to Poly Body Lick, guys.
That's right.
All right, guys, let's wrap it. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Bye.